EU. This vaccine has proven to be highly effective. It prevents severe disease and hospitalisation, and it is saving lives. Vaccination is extremely important in helping us in the fight against COVID-19, and we need to use the vaccines we have to protect us from the devastating effects. The Prague, after a very in-depth analysis, has concluded that the reported cases of unusual blood clotting following vaccination with the AstraZeneca vaccine should be listed as possible side effects of the vaccine. As we communicated last week, we convened an ad hoc expert group composed of experts from a range of medical specialities, including haematologists, neurologists, epidemiologists and virologists. Based on the current available evidence, specific risk factors such as age, gender or previous medical history of clotting disorders have not been able to be confirmed, as the rare events are seen in all ages and in men and women. A plausible explanation for these rare side events is an immune response to the vaccine, leading to a condition similar to one seen sometimes in patients treated with heparin. It's called heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. And Dr. Strauss will give us more details from the assessment. EMA is working very closely with the national competent authorities in all the EU member states and the company to make sure that these risks are proactively communicated to healthcare professionals. It's important that both vaccinated people and healthcare professionals are aware of the signs and symptoms of these unusual blood clotting disorders so that they can be spotted quickly to minimise any possible risks. We will continue to monitor the scientific evidence available on both effectiveness and safety of all the authorised COVID-19 vaccines, and we will issue further recommendations if necessary on the grounds of science and robust evidence. This case clearly demonstrates one of the challenges posed by large-scale vaccination campaigns. When millions of people receive these vaccines, very rare events can occur that were not identified during the clinical trials. The role of pharmacovigilance, the monitoring of these side effects, is to help us to rapidly detect and analyse these risks and their impact on the benefit-risk profile of the vaccine. This case also shows us that our pharmacovigilance system is working. These very rare and unusual events have been picked up, identified, analysed and have allowed us to come to science-based recommendations to allow the safe and effective use of this vaccine. EMA's scientific assessment will continue to work on all recommendations around this vaccine. Any national decision on the optimal use in vaccination campaigns will also take into account the pandemic situation in any individual country and other factors such as hospitalisation and availability of vaccines. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm now very pleased to hand over to the Chair of our Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee, Dr. Sabina Strauss.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cook, and good afternoon. Over the past few weeks, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, PRAC, that I chair, has analysed reports of blood clots in people who received the COVID-19 vaccine, AstraZeneca. As Ms. Cook said, the PRAC has confirmed that overall, the benefits of the vaccine from AstraZeneca in preventing COVID-19 are well established and the risks are very rare. The PRAC has conducted a very thorough review of the reports of rare and unusual blood clotting events in combination with low blood platelets, with the help of an ad hoc expert group that looked at the data in great detail. The committee has carried out a detailed review of the 62 cases of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis and 24 cases of splanchnic vein thrombosis in the European Union Drug Safety Database, EUDR Vigilance, as of March 2020. 2, and 18 of these cases were fatal. The cases came mainly from reporting systems of the European Economic Area and the UK. I can provide you also with more recent figures. As of April 4, 2021, the EU Drug Safety Database had received a total of 169 cases of CVST and 53 of splanchnic vein thrombosis. And at that moment, 34 million people were vaccinated in the European Economic Area and the UK. The more recent data did not change any of the PRAC recommendations. After extensive discussions within the committee and taking into account the findings of the expert group, our conclusion is that these clotting disorders are very rare side effects of the vaccine. This conclusion is based on the detailed clinical, mechanistic and epidemiological assessments, including a distinct clinical pattern, immunological findings and observation of more reported cases than would be expected from the background rates of these unusual conditions. The currently available data did not allow us to identify a definite cause for these complications. However, plausible explanations have been put forward, including an immune response that leads to a condition that seems similar to an atypical heparin-induced thrombocytopenia hit.
We're going to leave that conference in Amsterdam there for a moment just to update you with some lines that we're getting as to what we can expect to be hearing from the UK medicines regulator. It's being reported that those under 30 are going to be recommended that they should be offered Pfizer or Moderna instead of AstraZeneca. The MHRA is expected to say there's still huge benefits of the vaccine in preventing COVID-19 and serious disease, but a differentiated approach looks like it's going to be recommended by the regulator for those people who are under the age of 30. We can go back now to Sky Science correspondent Thomas Moore, who has been listening in. Many calls, Thomas, for some sort of risk-mitigated approach. It looks like that's what we might be hearing from the MHRA shortly.
Yes, it all comes down to risk and benefit. Now, clearly, older people are at much higher risk of dying from COVID. For them, they can take the risk of a blood clot because it is still extremely rare, just 4 in a million or so. And so the risk of COVID is much, much higher. But, of course, younger people, those in their 20s, the risks of dying are very low indeed. And that is why the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, has taken the view that for people aged between 18 and 29, that they should be offered an alternative vaccine. Either Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine now being rolled out in Wales from today and elsewhere in the UK in the coming weeks. There are going to be several million doses of those, so they will be offered an alternative because so far there is no safety signal associated with those RNA vaccines. It's a different kind of technology to the Oxford AstraZeneca one, and that's why they're taking the precautionary approach. And for these young people where the benefits of vaccination are lower, that they also have to reduce the risk, and that means giving these alternative vaccines, not AstraZeneca.
What do we know, Thomas? You were just talking there about the number of vaccines we've got, the different types of vaccine. We had Moderna coming on stream today. We have been warned that there's going to be disruption in supply to the vaccine programme this month. That cohort that we're talking about, the bulk of which won't expect to be seeing their first jabs until towards the summer. What do we think it could mean for the progress of the vaccine programme?
Well, certainly there's potential that it will be delayed by a few weeks. And yes, these people in their 20s would have been the last to receive the vaccinations because we're still going down the age bands over the weeks. Now, there's nobody due to receive their first doses in April because there's already been a supply issue with the vaccines, but things will pick up again from May and begin to be rolled out. But you can expect that the government's target of reaching everybody by the end of July may now have to be pushed back into August if there is a problem. Now, they will, I'm sure, say that as long as all the pharmaceutical companies are able to deliver their doses on time, then they should be okay, because there will be other vaccines due to come on stream, not least the one from Johnson & Johnson, which is a single dose, but also one from Novartis. So the medicine cabinet of vaccinations is going to increase, and that will help certainly to get over this problem that does seem to be emerging with the AstraZeneca jab.
What about people who are in that cohort, Thomas, who may have already had the first dose of an AstraZeneca vaccine? What then happens?
So the thinking is that they should, and we will hear the details in the news briefing shortly, that they should come forward still and have their second dose. Now, whether they would in the circumstances, particularly when people of a similar age who've yet to have their first dose are being told that they should be given an alternative, that will be a real test of confidence in the vaccine. But the medical regulator and the vaccine experts for the government do believe that there is still good benefit from this vaccine. There is no doubt that older people should still have the AstraZeneca vaccine. If there are lots of doses available, take them, because the risks of COVID are so much higher. The question is for these younger people, and I think we need to be very careful that we stress that it is in the young where the risk perhaps begins to look a little bit difficult to take, given the benefits of the vaccination, because people don't in their 20s don't generally die from the vaccine if they're otherwise from the virus unless they have an underlying health condition. They're only being asked to take it to stop the spread of the virus to the general population.
Now, that risk trade-off certainly becomes very poignant, doesn't it, when you think about it like that for the people in the younger cohorts. What we were hearing from the EMA there was that they hadn't yet identified any particular risk factor associated with gender or with age. So are we just to presume that the investigations are still ongoing and this is really just a precaution?
It is a precaution, and they don't really understand what's going on. They have found some evidence of antibodies in the blood that are associated with other clotting disorders. Now, is that an immunological consequence of vaccination? We don't know, but it is a possible causative link with the vaccine, and that's why people are being extremely cautious. And certainly we've heard from the German authorities that there is this association with young women, and as a precaution, the French, the Germans, they've all, and the Canadians rather, they've all taken the view that just to be sure, just to be safe, they are not going to give the AstraZeneca people even to the middle-aged. Now, here in the UK, the decision has been to set the bar at a lower age band, at the age of 30. So it is definitely a split, if you like, within Europe on the evidence and just what action they need to take.
None of this, Thomas, though, is going to help confidence, is it, in vaccines, particularly in Europe, where hesitancy is a bigger problem?
I think this is going to be a big test because, as you say, on the continent, there's already been a big dip in all vaccines, but particularly the AstraZeneca vaccine. Here in the UK, confidence in the AstraZeneca vaccine has held up. People do believe that this is a good British vaccine, and for older people, there is no doubt that it certainly is. I think what people will be now asking themselves
I'm sorry,
is
I need to cut you off there. We are just seeing this press conference getting underway at the Department of Health. Let's listen in. We're just waiting for this press conference to get underway. We can see the various figures who we've come to know through this pandemic assembled there. We have Dr. June Rain, Chief Executive of the MHRA, Professor Jonathan Van Tam as well, Deputy Chief Medical Officer.
I'm Jonathan Van Tam, Deputy Chief Medical Officer. And this is a clinical and scientific briefing. I'm joined today on my right by Professor Wei Shen Lim, Chair of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI. To my immediate left by Professor Rain, Chief Executive Officer of the MHRA, and to my extreme left by Professor Munir Pir Mohammed, who is Chair of the Commission on Human Medicines. So today's briefing is about the UK vaccine programme. In particular, it is about the AZ vaccine, and we will explain as we go through about a change of course, a course correction, if you like, to the UK programme. Now, if you could have said to me back in March 2020 and predicted how far we would have come so far with our vaccine programme, then I'm not sure I would have believed that we would have got as far as we have. The UK vaccine programme has been the most enormous success indeed. And if you said to me that by March 2021 we would not have needed a course correction, that also would have amazed me. So we must keep this in context of the enormous success that we've achieved so far. I'm going to stop there for now and allow Professor Rain to open the briefing by explaining her perspective from the MHRA on where we are arriving at today. Professor Rain.
Thank you, Professor Van Tam. I will now update on MHRA's rigorous scientific review of safety reports of very rare and specific blood clots with low platelet count, thrombocytopenia, associated with COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca. Over 20 million doses of the AZ vaccine have been given in the UK, and we know that vaccines are the best way to protect people from COVID-19 and have already saved thousands of lives, and in fact around 6,000 modelled in the UK by the end of February. But no effective medicine or vaccine is without risk, and with vaccines more complex than usual because the benefits can be to people other than the individual taking the vaccine. While the clinical trials of vaccines allow us to assess relatively common effects, very rare effects are only detected when a vaccine is used at scale on a large enough number of people, and that is why the UK has careful monitoring systems in place, and these monitoring systems are now detecting a potential side effect of the COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca in an extremely small number of people. The evidence is firming up, and our review has concluded that while it's a strong possibility, more work is needed to establish beyond all doubt that the vaccine has caused these side effects. Our role is to continually monitor safety during widespread use, to confirm that the vaccines are performing as expected, to identify any very rare side effects, and to ensure the benefits outweigh the risks. The public's safety is at the forefront of our minds. Our teams of safety experts, scientists, clinicians and epidemiologists have investigated, reviewed and evaluated thoroughly and scientifically all safety reports, and our safety reviews are carried out in tandem with the vaccination programme. We've gathered a large amount of data on the safety profile of the available vaccines, and we've done a rigorous scientific review of all the available data with regards to suspected blood clots with low platelet count. The Commission on Human Medicines expert working group has also met frequently and critically assessed all the data alongside our regulatory review, and this has also included lay representatives and advice from leading haematologists. Based on the current evidence, the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca against COVID-19 and its associated risks, hospitalisation and death, continues to outweigh the risks for the vast majority of people. Our review has reinforced that the risk of this rare suspected side effect remains extremely small. By the 31st of March, over 20 million doses having been given, we have had 79 case reports up to and including that date, 31st of March. All 79 cases occurred after the first dose. Of these 79 cases, 19 people have sadly died. These cases occurred in 51 women and 28 men, aged from 18 to 79 years. And from these reports, the risk of this type of rare blood clot is about 4 people in a million who receive the vaccine. 3 out of the 19 were under 30 years. 14 of the 19 were of the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis with low platelets, and 5 were other kinds of thrombosis in major veins. The balance of benefits and risks is very favourable for older people, but it is more finely balanced for the younger people. And we at the MHRA are advising that this evolving evidence should be taken into account when considering how the vaccine is used. Today we'll be communicating information and advice to healthcare professionals on how to minimise risks. And this will provide a lot of guidance, including how to report any suspected cases. The information for healthcare professionals will be updated, and there will also be information for the public, things to look out for as we continue to monitor this issue. Anyone who has symptoms 4 days after vaccination or more should seek prompt medical advice. A new onset of a severe or persistent headache or blurred vision, shortness of breath, chest pain, leg swelling, persistent abdominal pain, or indeed unusual skin bruising or pinpoint spots beyond the injection site. So Professor Samaneer will outline the Commission on Human Medicine's further advice, but I'd like to reiterate again that this is extremely rare. And with the proven effectiveness against the disease that is still a huge risk to our population, the balance of benefits and known risks of the vaccine is still very favourable for the vast majority of people. So, Professor Samaneer, over to you.
Thank you very much, June. So I've worked with the Commission on Human Medicines and the expert working group separately to thoroughly review all the cases coming in with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in the UK. We've taken into account a wide range of data sources. We've looked at information about usage of the vaccine in various age groups and updated incidence rates and benefit risk comparisons for different populations by age and gender. Over the last couple of weeks, the two committees have spent almost 24 hours in committee reviewing these reports. Each report has been carefully scrutinised by the MHRA and by the members of the working group, and further information has been obtained where necessary. We've also had independent adjudication of these cases by an expert haematologist, and we worked with another group of haematologists to develop a case definition of these events to make sure that the cases were identified throughout the UK and reported via the yellow card scheme. Based on the currently available data, the Commission on Human Medicines is advising the following. First, pregnant women should continue to discuss with their healthcare professional whether the benefits of having the vaccine outweigh the risks for them. Number 2, people with a history of blood disorders that increase the risk of clotting should only have the COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca when the benefits outweigh any potential risks. Number 3, anyone who experienced cerebral or other major blood clots occurring together with low levels of platelets after the first vaccine of COVID-19 AstraZeneca should not have the second dose. We will be continually monitoring further reports as they come in, continually monitoring other aspects to identify risk factors so that we can refine the advice that we give. At present, the data on people who've had 2 doses of the COVID-19 AstraZeneca vaccine are limited because these events are rare, and comparatively small number of second doses have been given. Therefore, it is not possible to draw a conclusion about how frequently blood clots with a low platelet count happen following a second dose of the vaccine. But this will be monitored closely by the MHRA and by the CHM as part of the ongoing review. So just to put into context, these events are extremely rare, as June has already mentioned, and I want to put it into context in relation to COVID-19 itself. It is important to remember that COVID-19 itself causes clotting and it causes lowered platelets. And I've got a few figures from a paper which is recently published. Pulmonary embolus, clots on the lungs, occur in 7.8% of people who have COVID-19. DVT, deep venous thrombosis, clots in the legs, occur in 11.2% who've had COVID-19. And of those people who've been infected with SARS-CoV-2, getting COVID-19 and ending up in ITU, 23% will have some form of clot. COVID-19 also causes strokes in about 1.6%. And up to 30% of people who develop COVID-19 will get thrombocytopenia, which is lowering of the platelet count. And that puts into context that the risk of clots and lowered platelet is much higher with COVID-19 than these extremely rare events which are occurring with the vaccine. So to finish off, the CHM has advised that the link between the vaccine and blood clots in the cerebral and other veins occurring together with lowered platelets is getting firmer, but absolute proof of the link between the vaccine and adverse events will need extensive scientific work. Based on the currently available evidence, and that the benefit risk remains favourable for the vast majority of people, but as June said, is more finely balanced for the younger people. And we are advising that this evolving evidence should be taken into account when considering the use of the vaccine. I'll hand back to Professor Van Tam.
Thank you, Professor Sermonier. Thank you, Professor Rain. You've now heard from the regulatory experts, and in a moment I will turn to the new advice from the JCVI with Professor Lim. But before we do that, I'd like to put into context in a visual way what the data are telling us in terms of benefits and risks. So if I could have the first slide, please. So this slide, and I'll go through the first one slowly, shows you in blue type to the left of the slide the potential benefits from COVID-19 vaccination, and on the orange part to the right the potential harms. And you can see that as you go down the slide from top to bottom, those benefits and potential harms are arrayed by age band, starting at 20 to 29, young adults, through to 60 to 69, relatively old adults. And the way these data have been arrayed are in terms of intensive care admissions prevented via vaccine on the left, and serious harms potentially due to the vaccine on the right. And I thank colleagues at the Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication at Cambridge University for help with getting this slide together. And this first slide is set, as you can see from the title, in a scenario of low exposure. And in actual fact, the rates of disease assumed in this scenario are lower than those we currently have in the UK at the moment. And you can see that if you look at the 20 to 29 age band, then the potential benefits amount to 0.8 ICU admissions averted, compared with serious harms of potentially 1.1. But as you go up through the age groups, the amount of serious harm declines, but the amount of benefit in terms of averted ICU admissions becomes much more pronounced. And these are arrayed over a 16-week period. Now, we don't expect vaccine to last for 16 weeks. We very confidently expect that it is going to be many, many months of protection from a vaccine. And the reason for using 16 weeks is because that is a typical pandemic wave. That's the duration of it. But you can see that at a very low exposure risk, lower than we have in the UK at the moment, the risk benefit is relatively finely balanced in those younger age groups, but it becomes very overwhelming in favour of vaccine as you go down up the ages. If we go on to the next slide, please. This is now a medium risk scenario, and it is set at 60 cases per 100,000. That is marginally higher than the UK average at the moment, but it is lower than some of the remaining hotspots in the UK. And you can see that when the disease is around us more, when there's more exposure, then the benefits, the potential benefits, start to stack up, but the potential serious harms remain static, of course. And this is still over a 16-week period, and you can see that the data become more overwhelming in terms of vaccine benefit. Finally, let's move to a high exposure risk. And this one, next slide please, is set typically at where we get to in terms of a pandemic wave. This is set at the height of the second pandemic wave that we went through in the last few months, and I think is reflective of the kind of scenario we want to avoid in the forthcoming autumn and winter if we possibly can. But here, when there's a lot of COVID-19 circulating in the population, you can see that even in the 20 to 29 group, the potential benefits in terms of intensive care, admissions averted, is very much higher than the serious harms due to vaccine. And that's why the regulators have concluded, as they have, about risk-benefit for the AstraZeneca vaccine. So I hope that's placed it all into a bit of context for everybody, so that I recognise it's been a detailed scientific discussion so far, but hopefully those figures bring it to life. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Professor Lim to give us the JCVI advice. Thank you, Wei Shen.
Thank you, Jonathan. JCVI has been meeting over the last 2 weeks, and we have carefully and independently reviewed the safety evidence and the benefit evidence given to us from MHRA and Public Health England. And that includes some of the kinds of data that you've seen earlier on the slide. We are well aware of the high level of protection that COVID-19 vaccines provide, particularly against serious disease, that is hospitalization, ITU admission, and from dying from COVID-19 disease. Against that must be balanced the uncertain occurrence of an extremely rare adverse event that may be associated with vaccination. Acting really in the interest of safety and for public benefit, JCVI feel that there are 3 points of advice that we would like to put across. The first is that information given to individuals who are being offered vaccination and information given to health professionals should be appropriately updated to reflect the latest considerations and deliberations by JCVI and by MHRA. The second point is that those who have received their first dose of AstraZeneca vaccine should continue to be offered the second dose of AstraZeneca vaccine according to the set schedule. And the final bit of advice is that adults who are aged 18 to 29 years old who do not have an underlying health condition that puts them at higher risk from serious COVID-19 disease should be offered an alternative COVID-19 vaccine in preference to the AstraZeneca vaccine where such an alternative vaccine is available. And perhaps it's useful to state what is not advised as well. We are not advising a stop to any vaccination for any individual in any age group. We are advising a preference for one vaccine over another vaccine for a particular age group, really out of the utmost caution rather than because we have any serious safety concerns. This will obviously have some implications in terms of operation and deployment of vaccines, and I'm just going to hand back, therefore, to Jonathan to set those out for us.
Thank you, Wei Shen. So I'm going to round off the last part of this briefing now, and people out there listening to this will say, well, what does this mean for me, and what should I now do? So let me begin with the deployment piece. This is a change in clinical advice for the under-30s. It will require some changes in the way that the National Health Service operationalises the vaccine rollout programme. But I've spoken to my colleagues in the NHS in some detail this morning, and I'm assured that actually, because of our supply situation in relation to alternative vaccines, the effect on the timing of our overall programme should be zero or negligible. That, of course, is contingent upon getting the supplies that we expect to get of the alternative vaccines, which are the Pfizer vaccine currently in use and the Moderna vaccine that we hope to bring into deployment from mid-April in England. So that's the kind of what does it mean for me. On the what should I do, then please be reassured that two sets of independent experts on the regulatory side, the MHRA and the CHM, and on the clinical advice side, the JCVI, are all over this, and I can testify to the many, many hours of work they have been putting into getting this advice to you in the last week or so, really almost working without a break. And my thanks to the members of those various committees and organisations who've worked honestly night and day behind the scenes to get to this point. This is a course correction, there's no question about that, but it is, in a sense, in medicine, quite normal for physicians to alter their preferences for how patients are treated over time. It's happened with vaccines only a few years ago. Up until a few years ago, the advice to the elderly and flu vaccines was get your vaccine. And then the JCVI then changed its advice and said our preference is now for the adjuvanted vaccine for the elderly. So changes in preference for vaccines are business as usual, and this is a course correction. But this is a kind of massive beast that we are driving along at enormous pace with enormous success, this vaccine programme. And, you know, if you sail a massive liner across the Atlantic, then it's not really reasonable that you aren't going to have to make at least one course correction during that voyage. And I frame this very much in those terms. The NHS has a message that we will get the right vaccine to you in the right time according to the new JCVI advice. There might be a small delay sometimes. There might be a slightly greater distance that some people are asked to travel. But the NHS is all over this and understands the challenge of making the advice from JCVI truly operational in a smooth way. So I'm going to sum up there by saying this is a course change. It is based on a clinical preference, based on newly emerging data. It will be kept under very careful review. Please remember that the benefits of vaccine accrue over a very long period of time. We are fairly confident that it's months and months, whereas the event of vaccination is a brief moment. Vaccines continue to be the way out for the UK. They continue to be the way in which we can get our lives back to normal and our economy opened up again in the shortest time possible. Thank you very much for listening, and we will now take some questions. I think the first question is from Fergus Walsh at the BBC. Hello, Fergus.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Can I ask two questions? Are you worried that this change of course might damage vaccine confidence, especially in the young? Be specific on the risks. Are the risks to those from the vaccine in the under 30s significantly higher than among older age groups?
Thank you. So on the first point, I will answer that question and say that clearly this is a course change. We don't want it to result in a loss of vaccine confidence. I hope I've reassured you that these are really carefully considered decisions, and it remains vitally important that people who are called back for their second dose come for it, and it remains vitally important that all adults in the UK come forward for vaccination when they are offered it. On the point about risk, I think I will defer to Professor Lim.
Thank you. The importance really is not simply the risk to an individual. There is a slight gradation in the risk of this serious adverse event occurring in younger people compared to older people. But it's really the benefit-risk balance which is most important here. And the benefit from vaccination is, as we know, very, very high in older people and decreases as age goes down because the risk from COVID-19 goes down with age. But there is still a benefit to younger people from being vaccinated. And overall, that benefit is still in favor of being vaccinated. It happens that where we have an alternative vaccine, we feel on balance it would be preferable to offer the very youngest people who have no other health conditions the alternative vaccine instead of the AstraZeneca vaccine, really just on the side of safety rather than because of any particular significant concern about the risk from the vaccine itself.
Yeah, thank you. Fergus, I think I'd just add that the slides that I showed to you were based on ICU admissions and didn't take into account the additional benefits of vaccine in terms of preventing long COVID, which we know is quite a significant problem after this illness, the costs of the illness itself, and the costs of potentially passing on the infection to family and friends. Thank you. Tom Clark, ITV.
Hello, thank you. Can I come back to the vaccine confidence question? You've obviously laid out very clearly what the risk-benefit profile are to reassure people what the risks they're facing are. However, what would you advise somebody who is, say, 31 years of age, a family member, a loved one, I don't know, who's been encouraged to take the AstraZeneca vaccine? What would you tell them in terms of the risks that they might be taking on and the benefits the vaccine might bring?
That's a very good question, and in fact we were just discussing that earlier because we know somebody whose daughter is around 31, and that's is a very relevant and important question. One of the really fundamental things about the vaccine program is that it's shown to be fair and it's transparent. And that's precisely why we want to have this briefing now to demonstrate what the risks and the benefits are so that everybody is informed before they come for their vaccination. And we have set out quite clearly what the benefits are against the risk and why we've made a decision about the 30-year-old and who is healthy and otherwise well. For somebody who's 31 and 32, I think they have to make their own decision as to what they want to do about vaccination. We would still say that the balance is in favor of being vaccinated because of the risks from COVID-19 and the protection that the vaccine offers.
Can I just have one follow-up question? Looking at your table there to explain the risks, it appeared to me that the risk of someone below 29 was 5.5 times higher of this very rare blood clotting event than someone 60 to 69. Is that what you've seen in the data? There is a definite trend towards a higher risk of blood clots in younger age groups. And what questions does that raise for, I don't know, paediatric vaccination campaigns?
Indeed, I wonder whether in a moment, Sir Munir will want to come back and just discuss the risk signal from the ages in terms of thrombocytopenia and blood clots. But in terms of moving into pediatric vaccination, JCVI has not made any firm decision yet on when to move into vaccination for children. The clinical trials are still ongoing regarding the safety of vaccines in children. So no decision made on that point yet.
Thank you, Weishan. So, Tom, in passing the baton back to Professor Sir Munir on the numbers, I will, in this passing through me, as it were, say that the JCVI's decision to give advice for the under 30s was taken, fully cognizant of the fact that their advice would therefore apply above the age of 30 to 31-year-olds, and that was part of the consideration. And we are talking here in the context of extremely small numbers by age, and that makes the data very difficult to interpret. But I'm sure Sir Munir will elaborate much better on this.
Thank you. So there is a slightly higher risk in the younger age group compared to the old age group. And obviously, as has been already said, that we do need to look at the relative benefits versus the risks in different age groups. The reason why it's a higher risk in the younger age group is not clear. As I said earlier, we need to undertake much more scientific work to understand why the sort of link between the vaccine and particularly the younger age group is occurring. And that will help us in the future to be able to then refine the advice that we give in terms of the product information. Further work needs to be done on all of that. With regard to the children, the trial has been paused by the Data Safety Monitoring Board for an abundance of caution, really. We know that children are at much lower risk of these clots and so on, and as we are able to accumulate more data over the next few weeks, the MHRA and the expert working groups will be liaising with the trialists at Oxford and then to be able to determine whether the trial can start again based on the data that's available.
Thank you, Tom. On children, I will just add that there are multiple manufacturers with different types of vaccines all working to do trials in children. And so this is not the only show in town in terms of trying to establish whether a vaccine can be authorised and suitable for children. That's an unfolding story that we'll have to leave to another day. Another Tom now, Tom Moore from Sky.
Presented this as a choice between the AstraZeneca vaccine and having COVID, but that's not true at any age. That if you've recognised the young could be given an alternative vaccine, then why not the middle-aged too? And can I also ask, in Europe and Canada, there are countries that have decided not to give the AstraZeneca vaccine to anybody under the age of 55 or 60. Are they being too cautious?
Would you like to begin on that, Weishan?
Sure, thank you. Every country has to make their own decision regarding what is best for their own population. And that takes into account the kind of disease that we have in our country, the size of the wave, the risk of a next wave occurring, the amount of vaccines we have, how well the vaccine program is being delivered, and obviously the values of our own people, whether we want to accept the vaccine or not. So I believe that every country will, in the end, have to make their own decision regarding the risk and benefit. Just as an example, it's sad to say but true that in some countries life expectancy is not as good as it is in the UK, and people may live to a mean age of about 50. And for them, their life expectancy will mean that their risk benefit in terms of when to draw the line against a particular vaccine, it may be any of the vaccines that are available, will be different from another country where life expectancy may be different. And so it's taking all of these things into account that we've come to a decision that in the UK, given our vaccine availability, our supply, the kind of pandemic that we're having, the B117 variant that we've had, all of these together, we felt that the correct judgment was that it is around the 30-year threshold where there are younger people who do not have any health conditions, where we would offer the alternative vaccine, rather than saying everybody in the country should be offered an alternative vaccine, because really this is an extremely rare adverse event. We do not know for sure that it's related to one vaccine or not yet. It may also be relevant to some other vaccine. It may not even be related to a vaccine. It may be related to COVID itself. We're just unsure, and the advice we're giving is really based very much on protecting the population and working on a principle that safety is our biggest concern.
So thank you, Wei Shen. Tom, I'm going to reinforce the point about context. And Wei Shen has kind of stolen the example about a low-income country where sadly life expectancy is not the same as the UK. And the context of risk and benefit is going to be very different in each population. And the JCVI was entirely free to make its own advice and recommendation to us as it saw fit. That has always been the way with JCVI. They are always independent and they can say and do as they wish. That having been said, if you look at some of my slides, and if you look, for example, at the high exposure risk category, then the idea of withholding a vaccine where a potential harm, for example, in the 40 to 49 group is 0.5 harms per 100,000 people versus 51.5 intensive care admissions averted, and that's not taking into account hospitalisations, long COVID and spreading to others, then the notion that you would clip a vaccine at that point is pretty absurd, really. And so, it is very much an independent decision, but I think it's been taken in an extremely rational way.
But is that doses of other vaccines?
No, it isn't. It absolutely wasn't. And as I've explained to you all, the programme should not be delayed because of this change in course. Everything should stay on course. Thank you. Right, we'll now turn to Nick McDermott at The Sun.
Good afternoon, thanks for taking my question. Both Sir Munir and Dr. Rain talked about the link between the AstraZeneca jab and these blood clots. The language before was pretty vague, we were unsure, and they both said that the link is now firming up. So for the avoidance of doubt, on the balance of probabilities, do we now think scientifically the data suggests that more likely than not there is a link, i.e. more than 50% probability, there is a link between this jab and these rare blood clots? And a second question, maybe Professor Lim or Professor Van Tam. We are expecting the Janssen one-shot jab to arrive in the summer. And we're saying that the under 30s will be prioritised for alternative jabs. So is there potentially a good news story for younger people who may actually get the one-shot jab or prioritised for it, and therefore more likely to get international vaccine passports and go on holiday sooner because they don't need to wait for that 12-week second jab?
Thank you, Nick. I will pass the first part of the question to my regulatory colleagues. I'm not sure who wants to go first on that one.
The important question of how firm is the evidence. Yes, the evidence has accrued not only in numbers and kinds of cases, but the pattern of those cases. So we feel it's a much more solid basis in our regulatory world to put in the side effect into our product information. And that tells us that it's a reasonably plausible link. But there needs to be much more work on the scientific understanding of this new constellation of symptoms to give us that feeling of the proof that you would expect. And that work will go on at pace. And I would like to hand to Samanir to tell you more about that.
Yeah, so the early evidence suggests that this constellation of symptoms is caused by an immune response against platelets, which allows the platelets to then lead to clotting in different parts of the body. But what we don't have, clearly, is the link between the vaccine and how the immune response becomes activated against the platelets. And that's where the scientific work needs to go on to identify what that link is, so that we can then develop ways and strategies to be able to overcome this adverse event for the future.
Second, thank you. Now, on your second part of your question, Nick, about other vaccines, and in particular the Janssen vaccine. In terms of the immediately available alternatives, the immediately available alternative right now, already in deployment in the UK, is the Pfizer vaccine. We do expect to have quantities of Moderna beginning to be deployed from mid-April in England, and those will be the two for the next few weeks, as it were. It's common knowledge and public information that the UK has placed orders with Janssen. We do not yet have certainty on the timing of delivery, but that vaccine could become available over the summer and is indeed a one-dosed schedule. Therefore, it must be part in the frame, if you like, or in the mix for solutions for vaccine requirements going forwards, and indeed for the young people you referred to. But that's always been part of the UK strategy, to have multiple horses in the race, so that we would always be in a good position, if we needed flexibility, to be able to exercise it. But my final cautionary point for you is that this is a vanishingly rare, but sadly quite serious adverse event. But it is vanishingly rare. And you can't pick these kind of things up until you have literally deployed tens of millions of doses of vaccine. And therefore, for the vaccines not yet deployed in large numbers around the world, we have to wait and see if we are going to see or not see similar signals. And therefore, it again reinforces the message that it's important to have many horses in this race. Thank you. We're going to Tom Whipple at the Times next.
Thank you very much. In terms of the mechanism, it'd be great to explain, if you could explain a little bit more about your theories about how this might be triggered, particularly as we've got several other adenovirus vector vaccines like the Johnson & Johnson and like the Sputnik one, that presumably a mechanism that causes this in AstraZeneca could be likely to do so in them too. And a second question, if we know this is a possible side effect, are there ways to then mitigate it and make it safer for people who have it?
Thank you, Tom. That's a very mechanism-based question. I'm going to pass that straight to Sir Munir.
Thank you. So the early evidence is suggesting that there is an immune response which is occurring in relation to whatever the event is. It may be the vaccine or it may be a previous COVID infection, for example. But the way that that immune response then targets the platelets and why it targets the platelets in the very small number of individuals, we are not clear about, and that further work is ongoing at the moment. I think it is really important to understand the mechanisms because it might provide us with ways of being able to prevent this in the future. For example, if you were able to identify the mechanisms, you'll be able to refine the advice that's given so we can actually identify risk factors, for example, and then try to prevent it in individuals who have those risk factors. It may also allow us to be able to then think about modified vaccines which do not cause this particular adverse event in the future. You mentioned the adenoviral vector, and yes, there are several vaccines with adenoviral vectors, but we don't know whether it is related to the adenoviral vector or it is related to something else at the moment. And again, that's part of the scientific work that needs to undergo at the moment.
Thank you. We will now move to Hannah Giesler at the Express.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the briefing. The majority of cases that have been reported were in women, with a smaller number in men. As you've said, there's not a lot of data yet because it's so rare, but just thinking about those potential mechanisms that you mentioned, are there any kind of possible biological reasons why women might be at higher risk than men, or is it just too early to say that? And then secondly, if I may, the yellow card scheme collects data on all sorts of possible adverse effects. Are there any others where you've seen any hint of an increased risk, or is this really the only one?
Thank you, Hannah. I'm going to pass to Sir Munir, first of all, for the question about women, and then to the yellow cards to Professor Rain. Thank you.
Sure. So of the 79 cases, 51 were in women and 28 were in men. The numbers are quite small, and this may reflect actually who's getting the vaccine, because many of the healthcare workers, for example, are women. But if you actually look at the incidence rate according to the number of vaccines administered, there's actually no difference between men and women. So we will need to continue to monitor this and see whether there is a gender predilection to developing this particular adverse event. But at the moment, we do not have any evidence to say that either men or women are more likely to get this.
On the yellow card scheme, every week we publish all the reports in summary form, but also the report on a Thursday talks about any trends that have come up. So I really can't do any better than encourage people to read it, but also to encourage everyone to report to us. Every report matters, and every report will be carefully looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So that brings us to the end of the questions posed by the media today. I would like to conclude at this point by thanking my colleagues for their time, and more importantly than their time today, for the immense amount of hours and effort they and their assistants have put in behind the scenes to get us to this point. I want to emphasise to everybody that COVID-19 remains a serious illness, that unfortunately, as Professor Whitty has said, it is something we're going to have to live with in the long term. Vaccine is likely to be and continue to be extremely important in this country in getting life back to normal. We are managing this very carefully. I hope you've seen real evidence today of authentic experts looking after your interests, doing the very best they can. It is a course correction, but nevertheless, it is full speed ahead with the UK vaccine programme so that we can get life back to normal. Thank you. This briefing is concluded.